What if the soil beneath your feet, the land your father bled for, the land your mother prayed over, the land that carried the roots of your entire family, could be stolen with nothing more than a forged piece of paper? This is the story of Isaiah Turner, a black farmer whose fields were more than crops. They were history, dignity, and proof that his family had endured against every storm. But when corrupt lawyers, a crooked sheriff, and the weight of a system built against him all set their sights on his acres, Isaiah was forced into a battle not only for land, but for the very name of Turner. Over 90 minutes, you will walk through intimidation in the night, false arrests, courtroom battles, and flames meant to erase generations of work. You will see what happens when a man who has nothing left to lose stands against power itself. This is not just a story of soil and law. It is the story of how dignity cannot be burned, how truth cannot be forged, and how one black farmer stood taller than every lie meant to break him. You are watching The Stolen Acres. And before we begin, if stories of resilience, injustice, and truth matter to you, make sure to subscribe to Blackness Hour, where every story shines a light on the struggles and triumphs too often silenced. Now let us begin. The soil of Turner Acres was dark and rich, the kind of earth that stained your hands and whispered stories of generations before you. Isaiah Turner rose before dawn each day, his weathered hands guiding the plow across rows of cotton, corn, and beans. For Isaiah, farming was not just labor. It was survival. It was memory. His father had died on this land, his grandfather had bled for it, and his great-grandmother had prayed over it when it was first handed down after the chains of slavery were broken. To Isaiah, the land was not property. It was proof. Proof that a black family could build, endure, and thrive despite every barrier thrown against them. The small farmhouse creaked with age but stood proud against the endless horizon. His wife, Sarah, tended to the chickens while their children, Samuel, a sharp-eyed teenager, and little Grace, barely old enough to carry a bucket, played near the barn. The Turners had little, but what they had was theirs, carved out of stubborn hope. But the world beyond their fields was not so kind. At the general store in town, whispers trailed Isaiah wherever he walked. That Turner land shouldn't even be his. Some muttered, their eyes sharp with envy. White farmers, their own acres struggling, eyed his fertile fields with resentment. A young lawyer named Clyde Whitmore, slick hair and sharper tongue, had been asking questions about the Turner deeds. One evening, as Isaiah sat on the porch sharpening his tools, a wagon rolled up the dirt path. Sheriff Hawkins stepped down, a thick man with a belly that pressed against his badge. His boots crunched the gravel as he tipped his hat, though the gesture carried no respect. "Evenin', Turner," Hawkins drawled. "Got word from the courthouse. Seems there's a question about your boundaries. Might be your land don't stretch as far as you think." Isaiah's grip tightened on the knife in his hand. His voice stayed calm, measured. "This land's been ours near 60 years. Ain't no question about it." Hawkins smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "Maybe. Maybe not. Best keep your papers close. Folks in town been saying your title's not as solid as you claim." The sheriff tipped his hat again and climbed back onto his wagon, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a weight heavy as stone in Isaiah's chest. For the first time in years, Isaiah felt a tremor of fear move through the soil beneath his boots. The land he had thought untouchable was suddenly under siege, not by weather or drought, but by men with pens and power. 2 days later, Isaiah hitched his mule and rode into town to buy seed. The streets bustled with wagons and voices, but Isaiah felt the shift immediately. Eyes followed him more than usual, conversations dipped when he passed. He kept his shoulders square, his head high. He had long ago learned the power of walking with dignity, even when the air around him soured. Inside the general store, he placed his order. As the clerk filled his sacks, a voice cut through the room, smooth and sharp as a blade. "Well, if it ain't Turner." Isaiah turned to see Clyde Whitmore leaning against the counter. The young lawyer wore his suit like armor, his hair slicked to a shine. His smile was polite, but his eyes gleamed with calculation. "I've been looking over county records," Clyde said casually, loud enough for others to hear. "Funny thing, Your deed's missing some signatures. Seems the land may not have been properly recorded all those years ago. Isaiah's jaw tightened. That deed's been in my family since before you were born, boy. Signed, sealed, and filed. Clyde chuckled, shaking his head. Paper fades, Turner. Laws change. If I were you, I'd be ready to prove every inch you claim belongs to you. 'Cause if you can't. He let the silence hang, his smirk doing the rest. The clerk shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Others in the store watched, their expressions unreadable. Isaiah gathered his seed sacks, his voice low but firm. You can dig through papers all you like. This land is ours, and no lawyer's trick gonna change that. Clyde's smile widened, almost pleased by the defiance. We'll see. When Isaiah returned home, Sarah saw the tension in his face before he spoke. She set down her basket of eggs, her voice soft but steady. What happened? He told her of Whitmore's words. Sarah's lips pressed tight, her hands wringing her apron. Isaiah, they've been after this land for years. They won't stop now. You need to be ready. Samuel, listening from the doorway, spoke up. Pa, we can fight 'em. We can show the truth. Isaiah put a hand on his son's shoulder. We'll fight, boy. But this ain't just about truth. It's about power. And power don't care much for truth when it belongs to us. That night, Isaiah went to the attic and pulled out the old deed box. He opened it slowly, the yellowed papers rustling like dry leaves. The signatures were there, faded but legible. Proof of ownership passed from hand to hand through generations. But as Isaiah stared at them under the flickering lamp, he couldn't shake Whitmore's smirk. Paper, after all, was fragile. And in the hands of men like Clyde, paper could burn. The following week, the Turner farm carried on as if nothing had changed, rows to plow, animals to feed, children to school. But the air was heavier, as though the land itself sensed the storm brewing. Sarah moved with quiet urgency, storing food in jars, keeping candles ready. Samuel lingered near his father more than usual, watching with wary eyes. It was late afternoon when the rumble of wagon wheels carried up the dusty road again. Isaiah was fixing the fence when he saw it crest the hill, Sheriff Hawkins, this time not alone. Beside him sat Clyde Whitmore, a rolled bundle of papers in his hand. Isaiah set down his hammer, his chest tightening. Sarah appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes narrowing at the sight. Turner, Hawkins called out as he climbed down, boots crunching gravel. Got some official business for you. Isaiah met them halfway, his posture straight. What business? Whitmore unrolled the papers with deliberate slowness, the crisp crack of parchment sharp in the quiet air. Seems there's been a correction in the county registry. According to these documents, part of your land was never lawfully transferred. Which means, technically, it don't belong to you. Sarah gasped softly from the porch. Samuel clenched his fists. Isaiah's voice was steady but hard. That's a lie. Those papers are forged. Whitmore's smile was thin. Forged or not, the law recognizes them. Unless you can prove otherwise in court, this land is in dispute. And until then, he nodded at Hawkins. The sheriff stepped forward, tapping the rolled papers against his palm. Until then, Turner, you're not to farm beyond the creek. That section's off limits until the courts decide. You cross that line, you'll be trespassing. Isaiah's jaw locked, his knuckles widening. That creek ran through the heart of his best fields. Cutting him off from it meant choking his harvest before it began. You can't take my fields, he said, his voice low, trembling not with fear but fury. This farm feeds my family. That land is ours by blood, by sweat, by every sunrise and sunset we've worked it. Hawkins shrugged. Don't matter what you think, Turner. Law's the law. You'd be wise to follow it. The two men climbed back onto their wagon, leaving a trail of dust and silence heavy enough to crush the air. Isaiah stood still, his chest heaving. Sarah came to his side, slipping her hand into his. Isaiah, she whispered, what do we do now? He looked at the field stretching toward the creek, the soil glowing in the evening light. For the first time in years, the land felt fragile, like something that could be ripped from him at any moment. "We fight," Isaiah said finally, his voice like stone. "This land ain't just dirt. It's our name. And I'll be damned if they steal it while I still draw a breath." The next morning, Isaiah woke before the rooster crowed. He sat at the kitchen table, the old deed spread before him, his calloused fingers tracing the faded ink. The papers were fragile but carried weight, the signatures of men long dead, the seal of a courthouse that had long since burned. Proof, yes. But proof that could be twisted by men who owned the judges and the law itself. Sarah poured him coffee, her eyes weary but strong. "Isaiah, you can't fight them alone. You need someone to stand with you." Isaiah shook his head slowly. "Most folks too scared, Sarah. They seen what happens when you cross Whitmore and Hawkins. Families run off their land, houses burned, names smeared. Nobody wants that weight." But Samuel, sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "Pa, I ain't scared. Teach me what I need to know. I'll stand with you." Isaiah's heart swelled with pride and fear all at once. His boy was becoming a man, but this was not the battle he'd ever wanted for him. Still, he laid a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "You'll stand, son. But you'll do it smart. We fight with truth, not just with fists." That day, Isaiah hitched the wagon and rode into the county seat, deed in hand. The courthouse loomed tall, its stone steps echoing with history that was not made for men like him. Inside, clerks shuffled papers, their eyes glancing at him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. When he reached the registry office, Clyde Whitmore was already there, leaning casually against the counter, as though he had been waiting. "Well, look who's come to play lawyer," Clyde sneered. "Brought your old papers, did you? Let's have a look." Isaiah held the deed tightly against his chest. "You ain't layin' hands on this. I come to have it recorded proper." The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, took the paper reluctantly. He examined it, squinting at the faded signatures. Ink's near gone, Turner. Seal's smudged. Be tough to verify something this old." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "That's the county seal. You know it. My family been paying taxes near 60 years on that soil." Whitmore chuckled, pulling a crisp new document from his satchel. "Funny you should mention taxes. Seems the Turners missed a payment back in '09. By law, that makes the deed vulnerable. And here," he tapped the paper, "is the official record." Isaiah's blood boiled. He knew the trick well: create false arrears, claim forfeiture, then swoop in like vultures. But the clerk, hiding behind the veil of procedure, simply shrugged. "If Mr. Whitmore's paperwork is in order, Turner, then it'll be up to a judge." Isaiah snatched back his deed, his voice like thunder. "Then a judge is what I'll face. But hear me, this land's mine, and no paper forged in darkness will take it." Whitmore's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. "Then we'll see you in court." The Turners began to feel the weight of pressure closing in. Neighbors who once waved now looked away. At church, families shifted their pews, as if Isaiah carried a shadow that might stain them. Then came the harassment. One morning, Sarah found the chicken coop door wide open, half the hens gone. A week later, Samuel discovered the water trough tipped, its contents spilled into the dirt. At night, strange noises came from the fields, hoofbeats stopping just out of sight, the faint sound of laughter drifting through the darkness. Isaiah tried to keep steady, but his children saw the tightness in his jaw. Samuel begged to keep a rifle by the door. "Pa, they're trying to break us. Let me stand guard." Isaiah shook his head. "That's their trap, son. They want us angry. They want a reason to say we don't belong here." But the message was clear: Whitmore and Hawkins were tightening the noose. One evening, a wagon stopped at the far fence line. Clyde Whitmore sat with two men smoking, watching the farmhouse from a distance. They said nothing, just sat there until the sun went down, then rode away. When Sarah saw the smoke trail drifting across the horizon, her voice shook. "Isaiah, they're not gonna stop." Isaiah placed his hand over hers, steady and firm. Neither will we. The next blow came not in the dark of night, but in broad daylight. Isaiah was mending the barn roof when he saw dust rising from the road. Sheriff Hawkins' wagon rolled toward the farmhouse, and beside him sat Clyde Whitmore, papers in hand, his grin sharp as a knife. Isaiah climbed down slowly, his body tense. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron, eyes narrowed with dread. Samuel came to the doorway, fists clenched. Hawkins pulled the reins and climbed down, boots striking the earth with heavy purpose. He unrolled a sheet of paper, reading in a slow, deliberate drawl. By order of the county court, this notice serves as eviction. Turner family is to vacate disputed land south of the creek within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in seizure. Sarah gasped, clutching the porch rail. Samuel stepped forward, anger burning in his eyes. That's a lie. Pa, tell them. Isaiah's voice was steady, but his hands were tight fists at his sides. That land is ours, and you know it. Those papers are forgeries. Whitmore stepped down, smoothing his suit. Careful, Turner. Call it what you like, but the court will decide. And courts don't often side with folks like you. The insult stung, but Isaiah stood his ground. This soil was claimed with sweat and blood long before your name ever stained paper, Whitmore. We're not leaving. Hawkins folded the notice and shoved it into Isaiah's chest. You've been warned. Next time, it won't be a paper, it'll be chains. The sheriff and lawyer climbed back onto their wagon, rolling away as dust swallowed the road. Isaiah stood silent, the paper crumpled in his fist. Behind him, Sarah's voice trembled. Isaiah, what do we do now? He looked out across the fields, the rose glinting in the evening sun. His face was carved with resolve. We fight. In court, in fields, wherever they come. This land ain't theirs to take, not while I draw breath. The Turner farmhouse had always been a place of work, of laughter, of quiet prayers before meals. But after the sheriff's notice, the air changed. The paper itself sat crumpled on the mantel, a constant reminder that their land, their very livelihood, was under siege. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows seemed to whisper, "They are coming for you." Isaiah walked the fields at dawn with a heaviness that even the rising sun could not lift. His boots sank into the soil his father had once plowed, the same soil his grandfather had tilled with borrowed tools and trembling hands, determined to build a life in a world that insisted black men had no right to own one. Each row of corn was more than food, it was a line of defense, a living testament. And now, papers filled with lies threatened to erase it all. Sarah noticed the change in him. He spoke less, ate little, his nights restless. She tried to anchor him with her steady presence, pressing his hand under the table during dinner, reminding him that his fight was theirs, not his alone. Yet when the children asked questions, she could see Isaiah's silence was a shield, hiding the weight he didn't want them to carry. Samuel, however, refused to be shielded. He followed his father like a shadow, watching the lines etch deeper into Isaiah's brow. One evening, as the cicadas hummed their song in the trees, Samuel confronted him outside by the woodpile. "Pa, why don't we fight them the way they fight us? Why don't we show them we're not afraid?" Isaiah paused mid-swing, the axe frozen above the block of wood. He set it down slowly and turned to face his son. The boy's eyes burned with fire, the same fire Isaiah once carried at his age. "Son," he said quietly, "they want us to fight with fists and guns. 'Cause when we do, the law calls us criminals. But when they fight us with papers and lies, the law calls them gentlemen. You understand? Our weapon has to be the truth. The truth is slower, but it cuts deeper. It lasts." Samuel clenched his jaw, but nodded. He didn't like it, but he understood. That night, Isaiah pulled the deed box onto the table again. By the dim lamplight, he spread the brittle papers, reading them line by line as Sarah leaned over his shoulder. Some words had faded to near invisible ink. The courthouse seal was worn. It frightened him how fragile his family's legacy appeared, thin sheets of paper standing against men with endless ink and money. But Sarah placed her hand gently over his. "These aren't just papers, Isaiah. Their roots. You carry them like your father did, like his father before him. Roots don't scare easy. Her words steadied him. The next morning, he hitched the wagon and loaded the papers, his resolve firm. Samuel climbed up beside him, eager to go. Where we headed, Pa? Isaiah gripped the reins. To town. To find a lawyer who still knows right from wrong. The road was long and dusty, but every clop of the mule's hooves carried Isaiah closer to a battle he could no longer avoid. He knew the courts were poisoned, the judges in Whitmore's pocket, but he also knew something deeper. Silence was surrender. And Isaiah Turner was not a man who surrendered. The town of Millhaven bustled like any other small southern town. Wagons creaked along the dirt roads, children darted between storefronts, and the courthouse loomed at the center, its white columns standing like watchmen over the square. But to Isaiah Turner, those columns did not represent justice. They were pillars of exclusion, symbols of a system designed to remind men like him where they did not belong. When Isaiah and Samuel stepped down from the wagon, heads turned. The stairs weren't new. Isaiah had grown used to being measured, sized up, judged before he opened his mouth. But today the eyes lingered longer. Perhaps word had spread of the sheriff's notice. Perhaps whispers of Whitmore's plans were already circulating. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of ink and dust, the walls lined with shelves of thick law books. Isaiah approached the clerk's desk, his shoulders squared, the deed box tucked under his arm like a weapon. I'm here to see a lawyer, Isaiah said plainly. One who'll stand for truth. The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, raised an eyebrow and glanced at Samuel before replying. Lawyers don't come cheap, Turner. You sure you can pay? Isaiah's jaw tightened. I can pay what's fair. Point me to someone who still believes in fairness. The clerk hesitated, then gestured toward a side office. Try Mr. Henry Lawson. He's not like the others. But don't say I sent you. Isaiah nodded and knocked on the office door. Inside, a bespectacled man in his 50s looked up from a pile of papers. His suit was worn but neat, his face lined with years of practice. Mr. Lawson? Isaiah asked. The man nodded. That's me. What can I do for you, Mr. Turner? Isaiah Turner. I need someone to help me keep what's mine. He placed the deed box on the desk, opening it carefully. Lawson adjusted his glasses, leaning over the faded documents. He read silently, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. After a long pause, he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. You're right to be worried, Lawson said quietly. These papers are valid, but old. Too easy for men like Whitmore to challenge. And with Hawkins backing him, he shook his head. It won't be easy. Isaiah's voice was steady. I didn't come here for easy. I came here for justice. Lawson studied him for a moment, then sighed. You've got courage, Mr. Turner. But courage alone won't win in a courtroom. They'll drag this out, bury you in fees, twist every word. You'll need witnesses, tax receipts, anything that proves your family's worked this soil for generations. Samuel leaned forward, his young voice burning with determination. We have all that. My pa's kept every paper. We'll bring whatever you need. Lawson gave the boy a faint smile, then turned serious again. I'll take your case, Mr. Turner. But you need to understand, when men like Whitmore want something, they don't stop at the law. They'll come for your reputation, your safety, maybe even your family. Isaiah's eyes hardened, his voice like iron. Let them come. I've weathered storms before. This land is my storm to fight. Lawson nodded slowly, extending his hand. Then we fight together. As Isaiah and Samuel left the office, the square outside felt different. The courthouse no longer loomed as a monument of hopelessness. It was still a battlefield, yes, but for the first time, Isaiah felt he had an ally, a sword to match Whitmore's pen. But in the shadows of the square, Clyde Whitmore watched from across the street, his arms crossed, his smirk faint but dangerous. He had seen Isaiah enter Lawson's office. He had seen the fire in his stride as he left. And Whitmore whispered under his breath, So you want a war? Then a war you'll have. The first hearing was scheduled on a humid Monday morning, when the air itself seemed to cling to skin like sweat-soaked cloth. Isaiah rose before dawn, dressed in his best suit, one that had been carefully pressed by Sarah the night before. His hands trembled slightly as he buttoned the jacket, not from fear of Whitmore, but from the knowledge that this courtroom held power over his family's future. Sarah laid her hand gently on his arm, her eyes steady though her lips quivered. Remember, Isaiah, you don't walk in there alone. You carry your father, your grandfather, every Turner before you. Samuel, tall and serious now, held the deed box tightly, his young jaw set like stone. He would stand by his father's side as witness, a living reminder that this land was not just soil, it was legacy. The courthouse square was already alive with murmurs when they arrived. Farmers leaned on fence posts, townsfolk crowded the steps, curiosity etched on every face. Some whispered sympathy, others smirked, eager for spectacle. For them, it was entertainment, another black man about to be swallowed whole by the machinery of white law. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood, ink, and dust. At the front, Judge Everett sat like a monument, his silver hair slicked back, his eyes sharp but weary. A man who had presided over dozens of disputes, yet rarely one where the word of a black farmer stood against the polished lies of men like Clyde Whitmore. Whitmore was already there, flanked by Hawkins, his suit gleaming, his papers stacked high. He greeted Isaiah with a smug tilt of his head, as if to say, "You've already lost." Henry Lawson met the Turners at the table, his glasses polished, his voice calm. "Steady, Isaiah. Let them bluster. The truth has its own weight." The proceedings began. Whitmore rose first, his words smooth, his tone dripping with feigned politeness. "Your Honor, this matter is simple. The Turners claim land that, by law, was never properly deeded. Records show a lapse in tax payment, making their ownership invalid. What they cling to are scraps of old paper, faded signatures, nothing binding by modern standards." He held up his forged documents, their fresh ink gleaming in the light. "Meanwhile, the county has clear records, records that place rightful ownership elsewhere. This is not theft. This is correction." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some nodded, others frowned. Then Lawson stood, his voice measured but firm. "Your Honor, what Mr. Whitmore calls scraps are, in fact, history. Signed deeds, tax receipts, affidavits, evidence of nearly 60 years of continuous ownership. These are not mere papers. They are testimony written in ink, sealed by this very county. To disregard them would not only rob the Turner family but dishonor the very system you preside over." He handed the judge the old deed, worn but intact. The courtroom leaned in as Everett examined it, his brow furrowing. Whitmore smirked. "With respect, Your Honor, ink fades. Memories blur. And law is not sentiment. Law is order." Isaiah could hold back no longer. He rose, his voice trembling but clear. "Law is also justice. And justice don't fade with ink. My family's sweat watered that soil. My father's blood rests in it. My children's future is tied to it. If the law don't see that, then it ain't law, it's theft." The courtroom fell into silence. Even Judge Everett paused, his pen hovering over the page. For the first time, Whitmore's smirk faltered. Everett cleared his throat. "This court will review both sets of documents. A ruling cannot be made today. But let it be known, this will not be brushed aside lightly." The gavel struck, and the hearing adjourned. But outside, the battle spilled into the streets. Crowds debated, voices clashed. Some sneered at Isaiah's defiance, while others whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, the Turners had a chance. As Isaiah stepped into the sunlight, Sarah and Samuel at his side, Lawson leaned close. "You shook them today. Don't underestimate that. Whitmore won't stop, but you planted doubt. And doubt can grow." Isaiah looked out at the fields beyond town, the horizon shimmering in the heat. His heart was heavy, but his resolve had never been stronger. "This is just the first strike," he murmured. "They want a war, they'll get one. But I won't fight with lies. I'll fight with truth, and with every Turner who came before me. And as he walked back toward the wagon, Whitmore watched from the courthouse steps, his eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. The game had shifted, and he knew it. The Turners were no longer just defending their land, they were defying an entire system. The weeks after the first hearing felt like walking on cracked ice. Every sunrise brought work to be done, fields to plow, fences to mend, but every sunset carried whispers from town that the Turners might not last the season. The sheriff's men began to appear more often along the road, riding slow, their hands resting lazily on their rifles as if daring Isaiah to look them in the eye. Merchants in town grew colder. Flour sacks weighed light, seed prices rose mysteriously when Isaiah stepped through the door. It was a quiet war, fought not with bullets, but with humiliation and denial. One morning, Samuel rushed into the barn, his face flushed. "Pa!" he shouted. "The south field, it's ruined!" Isaiah dropped his tools and ran. When he reached the field, his chest sank. The rows of young corn, barely sprouted, had been trampled flat. Boot prints scattered across the soil like scars. Someone had come in the night and destroyed weeks of labor. Sarah found Isaiah standing at the edge of the wreckage, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles went white. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with fury. "They'll starve us, Isaiah. That's what this is. They'll take your land by making it worthless." Isaiah bent down, scooping a handful of crushed stalks. The dirt crumbled between his calloused fingers, but his voice was steady. "Then we plant again. They can tear it down 100 times, we'll build it back 101. But Samuel's fire burned hotter. "Pa, this ain't right. We can't just keep talking it. Let me find out who did this. Let me fight them the way they fight us." Isaiah turned to his son, his eyes fierce. "Samuel, listen to me. They want your anger. They want you to strike so they can call you criminal, savage, unworthy. Don't give them the satisfaction." Still, that night, Isaiah sat long after the children were asleep, the lamp flickering on the kitchen table. Sarah came to him quietly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You can't shoulder this alone, Isaiah. If they want to break us, let them see we bend but never fall. Let the children see it too. That's how you win." Her words were balm, but the wound remained deep. The Turners were not just fighting for land anymore. They were fighting for dignity, for the right to exist without fear. The next morning, Isaiah hitched the wagon and rode to town to meet Lawson again. The courthouse square buzzed louder this time. Whitmore was already there, handing out copies of his forged documents to anyone who'd take them, spinning tales of how the Turners were squatters, thieves in fine clothing. When Isaiah entered, Whitmore's voice rose, smooth and venomous. "Ah, here's the man of the hour. Tell me, Turner, how does it feel to sit on stolen soil? Does it keep you warm at night?" The crowd chuckled, but Isaiah didn't flinch. He looked Whitmore square in the eye and said, "My soil keeps my family fed. What does yours do? Feed your greed." The laughter turned, some shifting uneasily. For the first time, Whitmore's smile faltered, just for a breath. Inside Lawson's office, Isaiah placed the ruined corn stalks on the desk. "They want us gone by hunger, by fear, by lies. But I won't leave." Lawson adjusted his glasses, eyes sharp. "Then we'll need more than deeds. We'll need testimony. Neighbors, tax receipts, proof that your family has worked every acre." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Then we gather it all. Every scrap of truth they tried to bury. If they want a war, I'll give them one they can't ignore." And as he spoke, Samuel stood in the corner, fists clenched, eyes blazing. He was learning that some wars weren't fought with guns, but they were wars all the same. By the time autumn winds rustled through the Turner fields, Isaiah could feel the walls closing in. It wasn't only the trampled crops or the whispers in town, it was the silence of people he once called neighbors. Lawson had advised him to gather testimonies, proof from families who had seen the Turners work their land for decades. At first, Isaiah had hope. Old Mr. Jenkins, who lived on the ridge, had known his father. The millers down the road had traded corn with them for years. Surely they would speak the truth. But when Isaiah knocked on the Jenkins door, the old man's eyes darted nervously before he spoke. Isaiah, you know I respect your family, I do. But Clyde Whitmore came by yesterday. He said anyone testifies for you might find their taxes double next spring. I'm sorry, son. I can't afford that kind of trouble. At the miller's home, the story was the same, only harsher. We can't be caught up in your fight, Turner. We got our own mouths to feed. Best you let it go. The door closed before Isaiah could answer. One by one, doors that had once opened freely now shut in his face. Each refusal was a stone laid in the wall of isolation around him. Samuel, walking beside him, fumed with anger. Pa, they're cowards. They know the truth, but they're too scared to say it. Isaiah's heart ached, but his voice was calm. Fear makes good people small, son. That's how men like Whitmore win. They choke the air out of a community until silence is easier than truth. Back at the farm, Sarah listened quietly as Isaiah recounted the refusals. Her hands worked dough, kneading hard, her knuckles white with tension. So they mean to leave us standing alone, she said bitterly. Isaiah placed his hand over hers, stopping her movement. Not alone. We got Lawson. We got each other. And sometimes that's enough to shake the world. But the pressure did not end there. That week, Isaiah's mail brought a letter stamped with the county seal. Inside was a notice of overdue taxes, on land he had already paid for. The sum was large, enough to choke a season's profit. Sarah read it aloud, her voice trembling. Isaiah, they'll use this too. Isaiah took the paper, his face carved with determination. Let them pile their lies. I'll meet them all in court. If they want to use paper against me, then I'll drown them in the truth of every receipt I've saved. And still, the harassment grew bolder. One night, flames licked the edge of the Turner property. Isaiah and Samuel rushed to beat back the fire with wet sacks, coughing through smoke until their arms ached. By dawn, the blaze was out, but the message was clear. Next time, it might not stop at the fields. As Isaiah collapsed onto the porch steps, soot streaking his skin, Samuel sat beside him, eyes red but burning with defiance. They want us gone, Pa. But we're still here. Isaiah looked out at the blackened earth, the sunrise painting the horizon gold. His voice was hoarse but resolute. And we'll be here tomorrow. And the next day. They can scorch the earth, but they'll never burn away our name. The courthouse was crowded the morning of the second hearing. Word had spread of the Turner case, and people came not just for justice, but for spectacle. Farmers leaned against the walls, townsfolk whispered behind gloved hands, and in the back row, young boys jostled each other as if they'd paid for a show. Isaiah entered with Sarah and Samuel beside him, the deed box clutched tight. His suit was the same as before, carefully pressed, though the shoulders sagged with the weight of sleepless nights. Sarah held her chin high, though fear lingered in her eyes. Samuel walked like a soldier, his jaw locked, determined to show no weakness. At the front, Judge Everett presided with his gavel resting lazily on the desk. Whitmore stood tall in his polished suit, his papers stacked in neat piles. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a predator ready to pounce. Sheriff Hawkins sat smugly at his side, his hand resting on his holster, as though to remind everyone who held the power outside the courtroom. Call your first witness, Judge Everett instructed. Whitmore adjusted his tie and called forth a farmer named Collins, a man Isaiah had once helped rebuild a fence after a storm. Collins took the stand, his eyes darting nervously toward Whitmore before he spoke. Do you swear to tell the truth? The clerk asked. I do, Collins mumbled. Whitmore stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Collins, do you know the Turner farm? Collins nodded. I do. Would you say the Turners have always owned that land? Or have you reason to believe otherwise? Collins shifted in his seat, his voice hesitant. Well, I heard tell their deed wasn't proper. Some folks say their taxes weren't always paid. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Whitmore's smile widened. And you've personally seen records to that effect? Collins swallowed hard. No, sir. Just what I've heard. Ah, Whitmore said, turning to the judge with exaggerated disappointment. But rumors carry weight when they come from respected men, do they not? Lawson shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Rumors are not evidence. Everett waved a dismissive hand. Noted. But continue. 2 more men followed, each echoing the same vague claims: debt unpaid, land improperly passed down. None held proof, but the steady rhythm of accusation began to feel like truth. Each word was a needle pricking Isaiah's pride, each glance from the crowd another reminder of how easily lies spread when wrapped in white authority. Finally, Whitmore turned to Isaiah himself. Mr. Turner, tell the court why your deed is so faded, so incomplete. Why your tax receipts are years old and nearly unreadable. If your claim is strong, why does it look so weak? Isaiah stood, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He spoke slowly, each word measured. Because my father signed that paper when ink was all he had. Because my grandfather guarded it when men like you said he had no right to own dirt under his feet. Because every season we've worked that land until our hands bled. That's why it looks worn, Whitmore. Not because it's false, but because it's true, and truth is carried through storms, through fire, through time. The courtroom fell quiet, the weight of his words hanging heavy. Even Judge Everett paused, his pen still in hand. Whitmore's jaw tightened, but he recovered with a sneer. Beautiful speech, Mr. Turner. But speeches don't win cases. Documents do. And mine are clearer, cleaner, newer. He laid his forged papers on the judge's desk with a flourish. Lawson rose to counter, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, ink can be bought. Paper can be forged. But 60 years of work cannot be erased by the stroke of a pen. We ask this court to consider not only signatures, but sweat, not only stamps, but sacrifice. Judge Everett tapped his gavel lightly, his expression unreadable. This court will take all evidence under advisement. We will reconvene in 2 weeks. The gavel struck, but the room did not erupt in chatter this time. It sat in uneasy silence, as though everyone sensed the weight of the battle ahead. Outside, as Isaiah climbed into the wagon, Samuel whispered fiercely, Pa, they're lying and everyone sees it. How can a judge not see it too? Isaiah placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder. Sometimes, son, seeing the truth and saying it out loud are 2 different things. That's the fight we're in now. From the courthouse steps, Whitmore watched them leave, his smile returning like a wolf scenting blood. For him, the war was not about truth. It was about grinding the Turners down until they had no fight left. And Isaiah knew, as the wheels creaked down the road, that the fight was only beginning. The days after the second hearing carried an edge like a blade pressed to the skin. The Turners still worked their fields, but every furrow plowed felt watched, every sound in the night carried a warning. The land had once been a place of peace, now it felt like contested ground. Isaiah tried to keep the rhythm steady, rise before dawn, tend the soil, repair the fences. But even the soil seemed restless, as though it too felt the weight of the battle being waged upon it. Sarah noticed the change in her husband. His shoulders hunched lower, his silence stretched longer. At night, when she reached for his hand, she felt the calluses tighter, the muscles wound as if, even in rest, he was bracing for war. One afternoon, Samuel returned from town with fire in his eyes. He slammed the gate behind him, his voice trembling with fury. Pa, they're saying things. At the store. At the school. They're saying we're squatters, thieves. That you're a liar. Isaiah laid down his hoe, wiping sweat from his brow. And what did you do, son? Samuel's jaw tightened. I told them the truth. I told them our land's been ours longer than Whitmore's been alive. And then... He hesitated, shame flickering across his face. And then I swung at one of them. He called you a cheat, ma, a thief. I couldn't stand it. Isaiah's heart sank. He pulled his son close, gripping his shoulders. Samuel, listen to me. Every blow you throw, they'll call proof of what they already say we are. Don't give them that. You fight with your words, with your head. That's where the battle is. Samuel looked away, ashamed. But Isaiah tilted his chin upward. You defended your family. That fire in you, keep it. But learn to aim it where it counts. That evening, a letter arrived, slipped under their door with no stamp, no seal. Sarah picked it up, her hands trembling as she unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged handwriting were the words, "Leave now, or pay in blood." Sarah gasped, clutching it to her chest. "Isaiah, they mean it. They won't stop at papers." Isaiah took the note, crumpling it in his fist. His voice was low, steady. "They want us afraid. They want us running. But we'll not give them the satisfaction." Still, that night, as the crickets sang and the moon rose over the fields, Isaiah sat by the window with his rifle across his lap. He prayed he wouldn't have to use it, but his eyes did not leave the road. Inside, Sarah whispered prayers of her own, her hand resting on Samuel's head as he slept. She feared not just for the land now, but for the lives that clung to it. And in town, Clyde Whitmore raised a glass at the saloon, his voice smug. "Let Turner stew in his pride. A man can't stand against the law, the sheriff, and half the county. One way or another, he'll break." But Isaiah Turner had been forged in storms, and storms did not scare him. What he feared was something deeper, that in protecting his land, he might lose the very people he was fighting for. The sun had barely crested the horizon when the sound of hooves thundered down the Turner road. Sarah was the first to hear it. She dropped her wash basin, heart racing. Isaiah stepped out onto the porch, shotgun resting at his side. Dust rose as Sheriff Hawkins' men rode up, their badges gleaming, their eyes hard. Hawkins climbed down slow, savoring the silence. Behind him, Clyde Whitmore adjusted his hat, standing with the smugness of a man who had already written the ending. "Morning, Turner," Hawkins drawled, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Got business with your boy." Isaiah's jaw clenched. "What business?" Hawkins snapped the paper open. "Samuel Turner is hereby under arrest for assault and disorderly conduct in town. Witnesses say he struck a white boy unprovoked." Samuel froze in the doorway, his chest tightening. "That's a lie," he blurted. "He called Ma a thief, called Pa a cheat. I told him the truth. That's all." Whitmore smirked. "Funny thing, truth. It changes depending on who's speaking." Sarah rushed forward, her voice sharp with desperation. "He's a child. You think jailing a boy will prove your lies?" Hawkins ignored her, stepping closer to Samuel. "Law's the law. He can answer to a judge." Isaiah stepped between them, his shoulders squared, his voice low and thunderous. "You'll not lay hands on my son." For a tense moment, silence pressed heavy over the yard. Hawkins rested his hand on his holster, the air thick with the threat of violence. Whitmore's smirk widened, drinking in the spectacle, hoping to see Isaiah break. Then Lawson's voice rang out. "That paper's no good, Sheriff." Everyone turned. The lawyer stood at the gate, his satchel in hand, his spectacles glinting in the morning light. "I've already filed a motion with the county clerk. No warrant for Samuel Turner exists in the official record. Which means that what you're holding," he stepped closer, his voice cutting like a blade, "is as worthless as the lies you've been spreading." Hawkins' face flushed red. "You calling me a liar, Lawson?" "I'm calling you corrupt." Lawson snapped back. "And if you try to touch this boy, I'll have you in front of a federal judge faster than you can draw that gun." For a long, dangerous moment, the sheriff's hand hovered near his holster. But the murmurs of his own men behind him gave him pause. Even they knew Lawson was not a man to bluff. Slowly, Hawkins crumpled the paper and shoved it back into his coat. "Fine," he growled. "But this ain't over." The riders turned and left in a cloud of dust, Whitmore's eyes locking on Isaiah with venom. "You can't hide behind Lawson forever, Turner. The law bends for those who own it." As the sound of hooves faded, Samuel turned to his father, shame in his voice. "Pa! I shouldn't have swung at him. I made it worse." Isaiah gripped his son's shoulders firmly, looking him in the eyes. "No, son. You showed them we don't bow easy. But hear me, you must learn patience. This war is not fought in fists. It's fought in every breath we take standing tall. Sarah pressed Samuel to her chest, relief flooding her eyes. Lawson exhaled heavily, wiping his brow. That was close, Isaiah. They're not just after your land anymore. They're after your bloodline. Isaiah looked out at the road, his face carved with iron resolve. Then they'll learn the Turners don't scare easy. 2 weeks later, the courthouse was packed tighter than ever. Word of Samuel's near arrest had spread, fueling gossip like dry grass catching fire. Some came hoping to see Isaiah humiliated, others curious whether the Turners could really stand against men like Whitmore and Hawkins. Isaiah walked into the chamber with Sarah and Samuel at his side. His suit was worn at the cuffs, but his posture was unbroken. Sarah carried the quiet strength of a woman who had faced down storms, while Samuel's eyes burned with a boy's fire barely held in check. Behind them, Lawson carried his satchel, his jaw clenched with determination. At the front, Whitmore stood poised, his papers stacked neatly, his expression polished like a blade. Sheriff Hawkins leaned back in his chair beside him, arms folded, smirk carved deep into his face. When the session began, Whitmore wasted no time. He rose, his voice smooth, carrying across the courtroom with practiced ease. Your Honor, we have established inconsistencies in the Turners' claim to land. But today, we go further. This is not simply about papers. This is about fitness, about whether Isaiah Turner is a man of character worthy of ownership. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Isaiah stiffened, his fists tightening at his sides. Whitmore paced slowly before the judge. This man, Turner, has a history of aggression. His son nearly assaulted an innocent youth in town, proof of the family's violent nature. His taxes, while paid, were late on several occasions, showing irresponsibility. And his reputation, he gestured toward the spectators, is spoken of in whispers across Millhaven. A man unfit, untrustworthy, unworthy. The words stung, each one landing like a lash. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Samuel gripped the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lawson shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. None of this is evidence. These are attacks on character, not law. Judge Everett tapped his gavel lightly, his expression unreadable. Proceed carefully, Mr. Whitmore. Whitmore smiled thinly, sensing he had already planted seeds of doubt. He turned directly to Isaiah. Tell me, Mr. Turner, if you are such a fine, honest man, why is it that so many in this town refuse to stand with you? Why do your neighbors close their doors when you knock? Could it be because they know something this court has yet to admit? The courtroom buzzed. All eyes turned to Isaiah. He rose slowly, his voice steady though pain flickered in his eyes. You ask why neighbors don't stand with me? I'll tell you. Fear. Fear of men like you. Fear of losing what little they have if they speak truth. That's not my shame, it's yours. His words cut through the silence like a blade. Even Judge Everett leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Whitmore's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He recovered, slamming his papers onto the table. Your Honor, the record speaks for itself. This man may hold papers, but he does not hold the respect of this county. And respect, I argue, is as vital as ink. Lawson rose again, his voice booming. Respect, Your Honor, is not built on fear. It is built on truth. And the truth is, the Turners have lived, worked, and paid on that land for 60 years. If we allow men like Whitmore to twist fear into evidence, then no man's land, no man's dignity, is safe. The judge's gavel struck sharply, silencing the room. Enough. This court will weigh the arguments. The case continues. As the crowd filed out, whispers swirled, some doubting, some supportive. But Isaiah felt the sting. Whitmore's smear had worked on many. He could see it in their eyes, suspicion, hesitation, a crack in the wall of community trust. On the courthouse steps, Sarah placed her hand in his. Isaiah, they're not just fighting your land anymore. They're fighting your name. Isaiah looked out across the square, his face carved with resolve. Then let them. A name built on truth can't be stolen by lies. And as he said it, Whitmore watched from the shadows, his eyes cold. The war was far from over, and the next strike would cut deeper. The weight of Whitmore's smear campaign spread like smoke across Millhaven. By the time the third hearing drew near, Isaiah could feel its sting everywhere he went. Merchants greeted him with curt nods, conversations hushed when he walked past. Even church, once a place of sanctuary, had become a chamber of silence. Few dared meet his eyes, and those who did looked away quickly, as if truth itself were dangerous to acknowledge. At the farm, the family pressed on. Isaiah rose before dawn, Sarah at his side, Samuel carrying burdens far heavier than his years. But work that once carried rhythm now dragged under the weight of fear. Each night, Isaiah sat longer by the window with his rifle, watching the tree line for movement, praying his children might sleep through his vigilance. Then came the night when the fear turned to fire. Isaiah woke to the smell of smoke. He bolted upright, heart pounding, and rushed outside. Flames licked the edge of the barn, climbing hungrily up the wooden slats. Samuel was already there, hauling buckets from the trough, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "Pa! They lit it! They lit it!" Sarah rushed out, clutching Grace to her chest, her screams muffled by the roar of the blaze. Isaiah grabbed a wet sack and swung at the flames, his body moving with desperate strength. Samuel fought beside him, choking on the smoke. Together, they battled the fire through the night, their clothes soaked, their lungs burning. By dawn, the barn stood charred and broken, its roof caved, the smell of ash heavy in the air. The livestock had been saved, but tools, feed, and years of sweat lay in blackened ruin. Isaiah sank to his knees in the soot, his hands trembling. Sarah knelt beside him, tears streaking her face. "Isaiah, they won't stop. They'll burn us out before the court ever decides." Samuel stood stiff, his face streaked with ash, eyes burning with rage. "Pa, let me fight them. Let me find who did this and give them back what they gave us." Isaiah gripped his son's shoulders, his voice raw but unshaken. "No, son. We don't fight with fire. That's their way. If we burn with dignity, not hate." But as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. For the first time, Isaiah felt the edge of despair cut deep. The land he had fought for, the heritage he had sworn to protect, now seemed to slip through his fingers like sand. When Lawson arrived later that morning, he found Isaiah sitting among the ashes, his eyes hollow. "They mean to break you before the law has its say," Lawson said softly. Isaiah lifted his gaze, his voice flat. "Maybe they already have." Lawson crouched down, his hand firm on Isaiah's shoulder. "No, Isaiah. This is the moment they're counting on. The moment you quit. But if you stand tomorrow, even in ashes, you'll be stronger than they know how to fight." Isaiah looked out at his blackened barn, the fields beyond, the horizon shimmering in the morning sun. His body trembled with exhaustion, but deep inside, the ember of resolve still glowed. "They want me to fall," he whispered. "Then I'll teach them what it looks like when a Turner stands." The courthouse bell tolled heavy in the morning air as Isaiah climbed the steps, his clothes marked with the faint scent of smoke that even Sarah's careful scrubbing could not erase. Behind him, Samuel carried the deed box like a soldier guarding a flag. Sarah walked with her chin high, though her eyes carried the shadow of nights spent praying for strength. The crowd was larger than ever. Farmers, merchants, townsfolk, all drawn to witness whether the Turner family would finally break. Whitmore stood near the entrance, shaking hands, his polished smile gleaming. To those gathered, he was the picture of confidence. But when his eyes flicked to Isaiah walking slowly but upright through the whispers, something in his grin faltered. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Judge Everett presided as before, his face unreadable. Hawkins lounged beside Whitmore, his presence like a warning that the law carried muscle as well as ink. Whitmore rose with theatrical precision, his voice smooth as silk. "Your Honor, we are here once again to address the matter of Turner's supposed ownership. But today, I ask the court to see beyond faded documents. I ask the court to see the reality. This man," he gestured toward Isaiah, his tone dripping contempt, "cannot control his land, cannot control his family, cannot control himself. His barn burned because he cannot keep order. His son is reckless, his neighbors fear him. He clings to paper, but he has lost the respect of this county. The words sliced through the room, each syllable a dagger meant to bleed Isaiah dry. Murmurs rose from the crowd, doubt, pity, dismissal. Isaiah stood slowly. His voice was rough, strained by nights of smoke and sleeplessness, but it carried like thunder. You talk about respect, Whitmore. Let me tell you what respect is. Respect is my father plowing this soil when men spat at him in the street. Respect is my mother planting seeds in the dark after her day's work so her children could eat. Respect is 60 years of Turners paying taxes, breaking our backs, building something out of nothing. And now you call us unfit? You call us thieves? No, sir. You are the thief. You and every man who thinks ink and lies can steal what blood has built. You can burn my barn, smear my name, scare my neighbors. But you cannot erase the truth of this land, nor the dignity of my family. The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Everett leaned forward, his gavel frozen in his hand. Whitmore tried to recover, his voice sharp. Your Honor, passion is not proof. This man speaks poetry, not law. Lawson rose then, his tone calm but cutting. Sometimes, Your Honor, passion is the truest proof there is. For 60 years, this county has taken the Turners' taxes, recorded their deeds, accepted their labor. If that is not ownership, then nothing in your books means a thing. Everett tapped his gavel once, the sound echoing. This matter is far from settled. But I will say this, Mr. Turner, your words carry weight. This court will take every document, every testimony under the fullest review. We adjourn until final deliberations. The gavel struck, but the air did not release. People filed out slowly, many whispering, not with contempt this time, but with something different. Some heads nodded. Some eyes met Isaiah's with quiet respect. Outside, Samuel turned to his father, his voice hushed but awed. Pa, you shook them. I saw it. You shook them. Isaiah placed a heavy hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady. The land ain't won yet, boy. But today, we reminded them, it ain't lost either. From the courthouse steps, Whitmore watched, his jaw clenched, his mask of confidence cracking. For the first time, he realized the Turners were not just standing, they were gaining ground. And Isaiah knew, the storm was nearing its fiercest point. But he also knew something deeper. Storms don't last forever. Winter settled over Millhaven, crisp winds sweeping across the bare fields of Turner Acres. The barn lay charred and skeletal, a constant reminder of what had been lost, yet Isaiah still rose each dawn to work what remained. His resolve, though battered, had hardened into something immovable. The community had begun to change, too. At first, whispers had been cruel, Turners were squatters, thieves. But after the barn fire, after Samuel's near arrest, and after Isaiah's words in court, doubt shifted. Now the whispers were different, they've stood longer than most would. They might just win. On the morning of the final hearing, the courthouse steps swarmed with people. Some came out of curiosity, some to see a black man finally beaten down, but others, quiet, careful, came to see him triumph. Among them were a few neighbors who had once turned away. Jenkins, the old man from the ridge, shuffled forward, his voice low as Isaiah passed. You hold strong, Turner. I saw your father work that soil with my own eyes. I'll speak it if I'm called. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put a tremor of hope in Isaiah's chest. Inside, Judge Everett presided with a stern face, knowing the weight of his decision. Whitmore rose with the confidence of a man who had long believed the system itself bent toward his hand. His voice rang smooth as always. Your Honor, this case has dragged too long. The evidence is clear. The Turners' deed is old, their receipts faded, their neighbors silent. My documents are pristine, the records in order. The law is not memory, it is record. And the record shows the Turners have no rightful claim. He laid his papers on the bench, their fresh ink almost gleaming under the lamplight. Hawkins leaned back, smirking, as though victory had already been written. Then Lawson stood. His glasses slid low on his nose as he spoke, his voice calm but sharp as a plow cutting soil. Your Honor, the law is record, yes, but it is also recognition. For 60 years, this county recognized the Turners' ownership. Taxes collected, deeds filed, harvests registered. If that is not law, then the very foundation of this courthouse is meaningless. He opened the Turner deed, yellowed and worn, and set beside it a stack of receipts Isaiah had saved through the years. One by one, he laid them out like stones on a path. Taxes paid, levies met, signatures that stretched across decades. Whitmore's ink is fresh because his lies are fresh, Lawson said firmly. But the Turners' truth is older, deeper, stronger. The courtroom stirred. Some leaned forward, some shook their heads, but all felt the gravity of the moment. Then Isaiah rose, not called to the stand but compelled by the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. He faced the judge, his voice steady, carrying the strength of every Turner before him. My father died on that land, Your Honor. My mother's hands are buried in its soil. I raised my children on its harvest, and I will not watch their legacy stolen by men with pens and greed. This fight ain't just mine. It's every black man who worked, paid, and prayed, only to be told his labor meant nothing. You may take my land with your ruling, but you'll never take the truth of what it is, Turner land. The silence that followed was heavy, almost sacred. Even Judge Everett's gavel seemed hesitant to break it. Whitmore forced a laugh, brittle and thin. Your Honor, this is theater, not law. But his voice rang hollow. And for the first time, Isaiah saw fear flicker in Whitmore's polished eyes. The courtroom felt like it held its breath as Judge Everett leaned back, his hands folded, his eyes moving slowly from Whitmore's pristine papers to the weathered documents laid out by Lawson. He tapped his pen against the desk, the sound echoing in the silence. Mr. Whitmore, the judge began, his tone measured. Your evidence is neat. Almost too neat. These documents bear the county seal, yes, but the dates are suspicious. Too perfect, too clean. He shifted his gaze toward Isaiah. Mr. Turner's papers are faded, aged, but they ring with authenticity. For decades, this county has collected his taxes, recognized his deed. To deny that now would be to deny not only the Turners, but the very record of this court. The room stirred, gasps rising. Hawkins shifted uneasily, his smugness faltering. Whitmore's jaw clenched, his polished confidence cracking. Judge Everett struck the gavel once, sharp and final. This court recognizes Isaiah Turner as the rightful owner of his land. Case closed. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then whispers spread like fire. Some groaned, others cheered quietly. Old man Jenkins nodded with pride. Even those who had once turned away couldn't deny what they had just witnessed, a black man standing against the machine and winning. Isaiah exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping as if the weight of 100 years had been lifted. Sarah gripped his hand, tears streaking her cheeks. Samuel grinned wide, clutching the deed box to his chest as though it were treasure. Whitmore rose, his face red with fury. This isn't over, Turner. You'll regret this. Isaiah turned, his eyes steady, voice calm but cutting. No, Whitmore. The only thing I regret is that it took this long for truth to speak louder than lies. The sheriff scowled, but even he knew the fight was lost, at least in that courtroom. As the Turners stepped out into the sunlight, the crowd parted. Some looked away, unwilling to admit they'd once doubted him. But others, quiet, cautious, nodded with respect. A few even tipped their hats, small gestures that carried the weight of shifting tides. Isaiah paused on the courthouse steps, looking back at the building that had nearly stolen everything. His voice, low but steady, carried to his family. We stood, even when they tried to break us. That's all we ever had to do. Sarah leaned into him, whispering through her tears. And that's all we'll keep doing. Samuel looked out at the horizon, the deed box still pressed against him. One day, Pa, folks won't have to fight like this just to keep what's theirs. Isaiah placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze firm. One day, son. But until then, we stand. Always. The wind swept across the square, carrying away the last echoes of the gavel's strike. And though the battle had ended, the Turner name now carried more than land. It carried proof that truth could endure, even against fire, lies, and fear. And in the ashes of struggle, the roots of legacy dug deeper still. Isaiah Turner's battle was never just about land. It was about dignity. It was about proving that generations of sweat and sacrifice could not be erased by lies, fire, or fear. He stood when neighbors turned away. He stood when the law bent against him. He stood when the flames tried to reduce his legacy to ash. And though the court ruled in his favor, the true victory was something deeper, showing that truth, even when outnumbered, cannot be silenced. His story echoes through time, reminding us that every acre stolen, every name smeared, every injustice faced by black families is not just history, it is a wound that still bleeds today. But it also reminds us of something greater, that resilience is stronger than corruption, and that legacy cannot be stolen when people stand. This was The Stolen Acres. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to Blackness Hour, where the hidden stories of struggle, resilience, and triumph are told, remembered, and honored. Share this story so others may understand the battles fought in silence, and the victories carved in dignity. Because the fight for truth did not end with Isaiah Turner. It continues. And together, we keep it alive.